The personal views expressed by our podcast guests are their own and are not legal advice or official statements by their organizations. Hello, my name is Debbie Reynolds. They call me the Data Diva. This is the Data Diva Talks Privacy podcast, where we discuss data privacy issues with the industry leaders around the world with information that businesses need to know now. I have a very special guest on the show, Michael Robbins. He is the co-founder of Learning Path Makers. Welcome.
Thanks, Debbie. I'm excited to be on the podcast.
Well, I think it's only taken us, I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 years to get this going.
It's a lot has changed, I think, since we first started talking about me coming on here.
Yeah. Well, you are a builder of human and digital learning ecosystems. And you and I had talked a number of years ago. We were very connected on LinkedIn. I love the things that you talk about education and data and modernity, like what's happening next, what we need to be thinking about. And so tell me a little bit about your career trajectory and how you came to this particular juncture at Learning Pathmakers.
Happy to. For the last 3+ decades, I've been working at this interesting intersection of education and technology and community development, from the grassroots level to the White House. And it's an interesting moment now to think about how we're learning as humans alongside machines. So when I talk about building human digital learning ecosystems, that's what I've been deeply engaged in over the last decade, which is, how initially the focus had been more around how do we add technology into human learning ecosystems. And now there's been an interesting shift, which is how do we put people back in the loop and in charge of AI, that in many cases, people are concerned that it's careening out of control.
I think one of the things that concerns me a lot, and I hear a lot, I see all these stories in the news. It's interesting now because of, people, this AI gold rush, as I call it. There are so many different articles, and some of them, I don't know about you, I'm like, oh, that's not right, kind of screaming at the screen about those things. But I think concerned that in terms of education, we're either not teaching as much as we should, or we're overly relying on AI, so that people aren't getting the type of kind of deep problem solving skills that they should have. But I don't know. Maybe I'm just going off the rails. What are your thoughts?
No, I mean, it's really interesting to look at what's happening inside schools. And that was a deep part of my work back in 2023. I did a deep dive with a network of schools here in Washington, D.C., where I live and work. And I had this great conversation. This was March of 2023 when the new ChatGPT, I guess that was 3.5 at that point, had come out. And everyone was just wowed, but it hadn't really hit the headlines yet. And so there was a school I was working with here in DC, and I sat down with some middle schoolers to introduce them to ChatGPT. And they were huddled around me as I'm on the laptop. I said, watch this. I did a prompt where I put their names. I said, you're at your school in Washington, D.C., and you're a team of renegades who are taking control of AI that gone off the rails. And as the story scrolled up on the screen, their eyes just got really wide. And then we translated it into Spanish, and then we translated it into a rap song. And each moment they were just blown away. And I said, this is amazing, but is this story about you true? And they said, no. And I said, okay, let's talk about where the data comes from that's in this story. And it took them 2 minutes to understand this, that they recognized some tropes that were embedded in the story, some things. I said, no, wouldn't it be better if the story about you was created differently? If you controlled the information that goes in here, so the story that AI is telling about you is true. And that's where they looked at me and they said, oh, so we can have our own AI? And I said, yes. They're like, we want that, right? We want that. They got it. It took them 5 minutes to get this. And so this interesting moment in education, there's a lot of teaching about AI. People are increasingly teaching and learning with AI, but the what we really need to move towards is how do we put young people in charge of AI for the future? And that's going to require a different approach. And that's what I've been working on. I'm really excited to talk to you about today.
That's so cool. That's so cool. That's amazing. And I agree. Well, not only students, I think that's what businesses want too.
I think all of us want it, right? And so what does that look like? 3 years ago, if I tried to talk to someone about AI and data, they would just look at me like I was from Mars. Now it's part of every conversation. I was in a Uber this morning in Washington, D.C., and in front of us was one of the new Waymo taxis. Have you ridden in one of those yet?
Oh Lord, no.
I had a chance last summer when I was out in San Francisco to ride in one, and the first 5 minutes was a little disconcerting. But after that, I think I was more concerned with figuring out what kind of music I wanted to play because you can pick your soundtrack in the back. It was incredible, right? And so this Waymo's in front of us, but they're not autonomous yet in DC. They're training them. There's a person actually behind the wheel. And I think about AI the same way, right? We have this inflection point now. People are talking about some of the limitations of the way the LLMs foundation models are built and what would it take to do something different, right?
Mhm.
I think, recently, folks like Jan LeCun at Meta, who's their chief scientist, has been talking about the limitations of large language models, right? That we've thrown all this data that's been scraped from the web from every source possible. And, we just put more and more compute. We're starting to get some diminishing returns there. And what he's proposed, what he calls is this joint embedding predictive architecture, JEPA, JEPA, we can call it. And this architecture that he's proposed would be to help machines build a model of the world so that they can actively reason. So I think about that as like that Waymo car. It's building a model of the city. It's helping to understand what the traffic patterns are. What people don't realize is that's what Tesla has been doing as well, right? Only we've been driving these Tesla cars and building the model for them that then they can use to sell it back to us, right? Tesla isn't just a vehicle car, it's a vehicle company, it's a data company.
Oh, absolutely.
So instead of JEPA, what I'm proposing is starting somewhere even deeper, which is what I call implication models. And it's how we actually create a new class of AI that learns from us. And so why would we want to train AI? Why would we want to tell it the things that it needs to know in order to learn from us? If that's going to sacrifice our data, if that's going to enrich others instead of us, right? And so what this leads to, and we could talk more about this, is what are these cascading things that then happen if we think about implication models as the goal for the next generation of AI?
Right. I think a lot of, and I want your thoughts about this as well. So when DeepSeek came on the scene, it was jarring for many different reasons. But to me, the two things that stuck out about DeepSeek when they kind of launched onto the scene is that they were building models, first of all, open source, first of all. Second, something that you didn't have to run in the cloud if you didn't want to, like you run on your own equipment. And that it just by virtue of doing that, it may type of thinking could eliminate some of the problems that we have with the larger LLMs, where it's more discrete in terms of the data that goes in there. If someone puts like more targeted data in that model, and then it greatly minimizes the risk of the person having to share their data into kind of these larger models. But I want your thoughts.
Absolutely. I mean, this idea of creating small language models that are built from, a foundation of data dignity, recognizing that our data is really like part of our presence. It's who we are. And so there are emerging these abilities to create things differently, have the standard architectures, but with different data protection. And that is a stepping stone on the way to these other models I talk about, these implication models.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit about the cascading. This sounds interesting.
Sure. So in order to do this, we have to figure out like what data do we put in there and why. And so what I'm introducing is a data model called DOTES. And this comes from my work in education, from learning more broadly. And DOTES bridges the way that we experience learning in real life with the way that we need to tell our stories. It's an acronym. It stands for do, observe, tell, explore, and show. So the show and tell piece of this is the earliest way that we tell our learning stories. I mean, I think about my time in elementary school, sitting around the carpet in Miss Levinsky's class in Camarillo, California. You'd bring something from home or something you'd made in school, and then you'd show it and you'd tell people about it. It's not Show and tell is actually a learning model. And then I think about later on as I started to do science experiments, you'd observe things, you'd explore what comes next, right? So this observe and explore pieces of DOTES are just that. So to break this down in order, what it does is it actually is data about learning through experience. It's how we experience the world. And
Mhm.
so we get this small kind of data capsule, a learning capsule, if you think about it as a entry in a ledger, that you do something, you could give a narrative description about it. That's the tell piece. On observe, it's, oh, okay, what happened? What did I feel about this? Right? What were my insights? What went well or didn't go well? And then explore is, okay, well, what would I do next? What would I do differently? And then show is the evidence. It could be a multimedia object, right? An image, the kinds of things we post on social media. It anchors that whole entry of do, observe, tell, explore, show. Now, let's think about this. That's some pretty personal information, isn't it? Right? And it's not the kinds of things that exist in our current data sets,
Totally. Hmm.
right? No one's putting that. I mean, you can infer some of it, right? That's the thing, right? The models we have right now are inference models. What this will allow us to do is to get to implication models, right?
Hmm.
The so what, the what next, right? And so imagine then that you start to get a record of your stories that then could be used as a basis to create your own AI representative. We can do that even with the large language models we have now and what you're talking about in terms of like private and secure LLMs and the right kind of data protection and storage. And so we immediately start to get something that's useful. And we've done some demos on this to show what DOTE can do. I did this with the middle schoolers I was working with. That story I told you about working with middle schoolers, that led to me teaching an elective class for fifth through eighth graders for 4 months last school year. Oh my gosh, middle schoolers are amazing. I learned so much from them.
That is
Uh,
cool.
yeah, but they got dotes, right? And we worked on building chatbots that showed them that if they collect their data and they protect it in particular ways, that they can create AI that works for them. So here we have something that also flips the dominant narrative upside down, which is instead of protect your data because people are exploiting it or protect your data because the AI apocalypse is coming. So if you protect your data, you can use it to tell your story, right?
Absolutely. Now, I love that. I love it because the way that you have students using AI is the way that all of us should be using it, where it's kind of augmenting or helping a human. And so the narrative that I don't care for is AI is going to replace humans. And I don't think that's the right thing because, and I want your thoughts. Because you have deep insights on experience, AIs don't have experience. That's what
Yeah.
humans have, or they don't have wisdom, right? So there are a multitude of types of knowledge, and so to assume that an AI tool can be like a human, I think is just is not right. I don't think it's the right, it's not complete, right? Maybe it can do some things that can augment what a human can do, or maybe it could do uh, maybe certain things faster, better, cheaper. But I don't think, again, this narrative like, oh, well, it's going to take over and hopefully not be our AI overlords. But I feel like people are really not discussing the nature of what intelligence means. And part of that to me is experience. So I want your thoughts.
You're absolutely right. I mean, this also gets us to the part where, it's AI that works for us, that has this purpose. And I think about that on multiple levels. One is that just the process of creating this data and training the AI this way has to involve us, right? Is we have this paradigm where AI has been created in an extractive way, in an exploitative way, without consent, credit, and compensation. People are really waking up to that and saying, well, what do we do next? And so, number one, there's process here. And then, secondly, it leads us into this conversation about, well, what do we do with this? If we're creating these things and we recognize that AI is going to transform the way that we work, what are the structures that we need to build in order to have the value that's created from these new implication models accrue to the people that help build it? And that's where I'm proposing a model for AI trust.
Oh, I love that. Tell me more.
Sure. So AI trust combine two things. One is what people have been talking about for a long time around data compacts or data trust. So if you think about like a nonprofit credit union, but your account is your secure data backpack. That's your private and secure account. You have control over that, how that's data used, revocable consent, et cetera, the right to be forgotten. Now, imagine too that because you have this account, just like money in a bank, if you're banding together with others, the collective value of that data now has real power. So it could be that this is now used to train not just what I'm talking about with implication models, but our existing approaches to LLMs. It could be used to extend this and reframe data governance more broadly. Because the second part of AI trusts is the infrastructure piece. And there, my analogy is things like electric cooperatives, which we've seen in rural America over the decades, that there also needs to be collaborative, cooperative infrastructure for data storage and computation. There'll continue to be reliance on cloud providers, but this issue of sovereignty has to involve both data protection and the infrastructure itself. So thinking about pushing all of this to the edges. And these data trusts then allow us to create, along with our dotes, our AI representatives, our AI
Hmm.
reps,
Hmm. Hmm.
which I see as kind of multifunctional. It's more than just about AI, it's more than the web.
Right.
It's about data dignity and this concept of digital personhood. And we could talk more about digital personhood and what that means, not just for the web, but for what's coming next, which is this nexus of spatial computing and ambient technology, right? So augmented and virtual reality and the Internet of Things.
Well, this is a topic that I love. So connected systems, Internet of Things, augmented, the edge. So this is great that we're talking about this. Let's expound upon that a bit. And I think what people don't understand, and I'm just going to say this and you just tell me your thoughts. So the technology exists to do the thing that you're saying, right? I think a lot of the incumbents really want to continue to sustain a model where, so like the age of the beginning of the internet was kind of like all your data went into a bucket into the system because your systems weren't big enough, strong enough, powerful enough to do the things that they could do. But now we have technology, the edge, or even on our phones or our computers that are much more capable of taking on more tasks and more work. And so that means that there are things now that you couldn't do 5 years ago on your phone, on your laptop. So there are to me, that creates the opportunity where for a lot of us, we're very concerned about what we share out, right? What goes into the cloud. We're seeing a lot of these data breaches and things, but really being able to make data something that we can protect by virtue of the fact that we're not sharing as much or sharing as widely, and we're using it in different ways that really enhance what we want to do as opposed to doing what other people want us to do. But I want your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I think back in history in these cycles of centralization and decentralization.
It's hilarious.
It is. I mean, I learned, gosh, I I wrote my first computer program, like real one that I remember, when I was in sixth grade on a TRS-80 Model 12 with 128K of memory. Okay. Now, this program was to make Dungeons and Dragons characters for my friends. That was my middle school nerd days. When I got into college, I started programming Pascal on a DECVAX mainframe. I also was on Relay Chat at night when I should have been debugging my Pascal programs. Right. This is the internet before it turned into the web, before it's Sir Tim's vision there. And I started working for Apple Computer when I was 18 as a student representative. And so I've seen this shift from mainframes to personal computers. And now we've seen this other kind of turnaround where we have these centralized systems made possible by open source and server farms. And it's resulted in the centralization of power again. But there's another piece that people are missing, and it's in the way that the web evolved. The web evolved without a model for citizenship. Actually, for a model for personhood, if we just like boil it even further down,
Yeah,
right? We don't exist on the web. Everything it was made with all the power on the server side. And so when
totally.
we look at what's happened in digital society and the imbalance of power, what we don't recognize is that because we haven't existed, we haven't been able to claim our basic rights. I'm
Mhm.
excited about what we can do with AI trusts and AI reps built on these models of DOT, because that's going to give us what we've been missing so far, which is this model for personhood.
Yeah, and so I like the way that you're talking about personhood. As you know, there's personhood talk now, but what they're talking about is another type of centralized system where it's like, "Oh, give me your eyeball, we'll put it in a big cauldron database, and and you can identify yourself across systems." And so I think that's the opposite of what you're talking about.
Yeah, exactly. We think about like, and that's where these AI trusts are so important, and the identity mechanisms that will go along with that, because we don't want our existence in the digital world to be controlled by any corporation or by any government. So, because then we can get deleted,
Totally.
and we see a lot of things getting deleted right now
That's
in
true.
many ways.
That's true.
Yeah, so establishing personhood will allow us to claim, like, if we just go back to like the Declaration of Independence, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Thomas Jefferson wrote those words into the Declaration of Independence. These came from John Locke, an English philosopher who was writing about natural rights. And he talked about life, liberty, and property. So if we just look at like we haven't been able to claim life, liberty, and property in the digital realm because of the way the web has been organized and evolved. We don't exist as individuals. The technical term there I come back to is we don't have a persistent digital identity across domains.
Correct.
We don't have liberty in many ways, freedom of association, freedom of movement, freedom to make the decisions without it being constrained by corporate platforms and algorithmic decision making. And property, we can't own our stuff, whatever our conception of that is, right? Is that data protection? Is it excluding it from others? And because we haven't had these abilities, what we've ended up with is what some people are calling these feudal systems, right? Techno feudalism, right? That we are, because we haven't been able to be people, much less citizens of a digital realm, we're just serfs and sharecroppers on other people's feudal farms. But this gives us an opportunity to change that. And we can talk a little bit more about this. It's a different approach than Web3. Yeah. So to go back to another English philosopher, Thomas Hobbes, in his book Leviathan, there's this phrase that has been, I'll paraphrase it, made still part of popular culture. He said that essentially life outside the kingdom walls is nasty, brutish, and short. And he had a point, right? What he was arguing was actually in favor of the British monarchy, saying that we need these structures in order to have order so that people don't kill each other, is what he was talking about, right? And what we've seen with Web3 is this push for decentralization that's been relying on this faulty premise of self sovereign identity, that you can exist and that you should exist independently of anything else. The thing is, that's not how humans work. We don't exist. We don't have identity by ourselves. We build identity in community. Also, it's not something that's given to us, like a blockchain address or a digital wallet or
Hmm.
a username or password, right? It's something that grows with us over time. So, this idea of decentralized IDs, these will be things in the tool set. Blockchain consensus ledgers will be important parts of the tool set for building AI trusts. But mere decentralization is anarchy, right? It leaves people exposed. It it goes right back to centralized control. And
Hmm.
we've seen that in cryptocurrency,
Hmm.
right?
That's true.
The movement back to these centralized exchanges that have been rife with fraud and abuse and criminal negligence and activity.
So how does this new approach, in your view, how does it enhance privacy or data protection?
So what it does is it allows us to band together to create this. And I've been working with a group of collaborators who key components of this. The the thing that's been missing, we have no shortage of technology solutions around this, right? And we wonder like why hasn't this come together? Right? We have, data protection initiatives for like data vaults. We've had people demonstrate data trusts. We have things that exist to drive AI inside businesses that are, it's company confidential. Military organizations, the Defense Department, they're deploying these in classified environments, right? We know the technology is there. What's been missing is the pathway to get there. What do we do first and why? And how do we build that? And that's where we're proposing a game-based approach that focuses on a particular ecosystem of teens here in Washington, D.C. And what we're calling this is Game Show. And Game Show is a way for teens, but ultimately everyone, to kind of journal with the help of AI. Imagine the way that these AI systems are working now, like character AI replica, they're interviewing you, talking to you. Who knows where that data is going, right? But imagine then that these interviews are kind of the part that gets you to creating your notes. And then you can have a part of the platform, the game, where you are workshopping these, right? You can see them because they're organized in this, right? We have an ontology now for learning stories that works for people and AI of do, observe, tell, explore, show. And we have 7 different categories of DOTE: character, excellence, service, relationship, adventure, making, and wellness. There's a shortcut to a post that did today that has more details on dotes. If you go to dotes.xyz, you can see that. But now we have this sort of corpus of dotes that you started to collect in a private and secure space.
Right.
And now you can use that to start training your AI rep.
Right.
Now, because we're using small language models or foundation models or LLMs, whichever we want to talk about there, we know that it's going to hallucinate,
Yeah.
right? It's not going to get the story right, but we can give it feedback and it'll get closer and closer and closer. And that's where the fun part comes in, is actually training your AI rep. So if you imagine that as like a game show where you get to quiz your AI rep. If it gets things right, gets things wrong, you can correct it. And what that gives an opportunity to do is then some back propagation of your personal knowledge graph
Yeah.
that you're starting to build,
Yep.
right? So we think about now not just retrieval augmented generation based on dotes, but now you've started to build your own personal knowledge graph.
Right.
Well, why would somebody want to do this? Well, it turns out then that when you have this information on dotes, this is immediately really useful for a lot of different things in school, in work, and in life.
Well, tell me a little bit about this is definitely different than AI agents, which we're hearing a lot about. But tell me what's different about this than AI agents for people who don't know.
Yeah, so imagine your AI rep as the agent that represents you, right? Now, what we're able to do though is start with kind of a blank slate. Instead of, I'm going to start by training an AI agent to, do my expense reports or to book travel for me or to set up meetings or, do my social media posts, right? I'm going to start with learning data, because owning your learning data is a way to learn about data ownership. Building
Mhm.
an AI agent that works for you with that data is a way to learn about AI agents.
Totally. Hmm.
Right. And we're going to have this whole world. We talked about, the eye scanners and biometric things. And we're going to have this old world of corporate owned solutions, but we need the solution that works for each of us. In fact, it's the only way that we can stand up to these
Yeah,
at
I
the
agree.
individual level, at the societal level.
I agree. And then how would the adults, how would like you and I, how would we collaborate? How would they work that way?
That's part of what we get to figure out. That's why we're at this amazing moment in history.
Yeah.
Because imagine, like, all of a sudden now we have personhood in the digital realm, right? That's a basis for the future of digital civilization. That's a lot to get our heads around. But be like, all of a sudden everyone's landed on this island, right? Instead of trying to go to Mars and setting up a society there, right? If we imagine the AI trust as like the moon base, but we're not going to live in Mars gravity and eat Mars rocks for dinner. What we're doing is launching an expedition to make the planet that we already live on habitable. I call it terraforming technology on
Hmm.
Earth, right?
Hmm.
There's no planet B.
No.
And
Gotta
so
make it
here,
work. Yeah.
right? So here we have this moon base of AI trusts with our AI reps. Then we get to figure out everything, right? We get to figure out, what does it mean to organize ourselves differently for economic enterprise? What does it mean to organize ourselves in for learning ecosystems where we're learning alongside with our AI reps, not just for school, but also for a lifetime of learning in our careers? And then what does it mean for democracy? Right? All of a sudden we have citizenship. And that's where, I a long background in civil society work, in policy and political philosophy. I start to think like, well, what happens when we can build democracy into AI? Then we can use AI to rebuild democracy. We've been trying to govern AI from the outside, and it's a containment strategy,
I
right?
agree.
We're bailing out the Titanic with the teacup. I one of the analogies oh gosh, the middle schoolers I taught when we were going through parts of speech, I had them watch the old Schoolhouse Rock videos, you know.
I love those.
Yeah. Lolly, 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 get your adverbs here.
They're great.
Um, they don't teach sentence diagramming anymore, right? And so what I discovered is that AI is a I don't know, a gateway drug to grammar because the hottest new programming language is English,
Yeah, it's
right?
true.
And but I also and when we're talking about like AI reps with them and what it's going to take to stand up to big AI, we watched Power Rangers. Did you ever watch the Power Rangers?
No, no, no.
Okay, the Power Rangers, you know, like there were five of them, they're different colors, and you know, it was Godzilla-esque kind of monsters would show up from time to time. And in order to battle them, they would have to do what they call their Mighty Morphin powers, where each of them would transform into the part of this giant robot, right? Or and then they'd battle whatever. Right? That's the only chance we have against AI is with AI that we control. So you talk about like these deep seek models that can be deployed anywhere. How do you regulate that? You don't.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. So we have to create this world of checks and balances. So I think about again, like what do we do with AI reps? It's about our educational ecosystems, it's about the world of work, and it's about the future of governance.
I agree with that wholeheartedly, right? I think this opportunity, the one of the big problems that we had was that there was all this data out here, there were all these systems, but we couldn't manage it, right? So we had to go to these big players to do it. So what AI is doing, I think, is giving us an opportunity to be able to take on more of that control that we really want. So I think it'll be really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it's a scary time to, and people are really concerned about what's going to happen with their jobs, with the
Absolutely.
future of work. And you know, this isn't going to happen overnight, but we have to commit to doing this now because what happens next isn't just AI on the web, as I was talking about, right? It's when you're actually living inside this, the real world metaverse, which you imagine these augmented reality glasses, mixed reality glasses. Predictions are that for many people, those are going to replace the phones in our pockets. We know that wearables, sensors, all the things that come along with surveillance capitalism just continue to grow. And so if we don't claim digital personhood and data dignity now, or we don't start on that pathway, we're going to be living inside somebody else's metaverse, like, and riding around in the equivalent of a corporate robo-taxi that's surveilling and dictating every aspect of our digital lives, which isn't just our digital lives, right?
Right. Exactly.
You know, people talked about this the singularity as being like the merger of humans and machines. I look at this different singularity, which is a merger of our physical and digital worlds and what that
Mm-hmm.
nexus is.
So, yeah,
Um,
definitely.
you know, we need new words for a lot of this. It's hard to describe it. You know, people
We
talk
do.
about like even the word metaverse, people would argue about that. AI, right?
Right.
Blockchain, all that
Mm-hmm.
stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I've started to think about this word spatia, SPATIA. It's Latin for space, not outer space, but all the spaces that we interact in all the ways, right? And so, what does this journey into spatial look like for us?
Yeah. Wow. It's so deep. Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. We could talk for hours about this.
We could, and but the thing is, like, we can't. I may write a book at some point. I've been spending most of my time on LinkedIn, which my teen son is called Facebook, but for even older people. Yeah, that would really hit home. But we can't explain this to people and expect it to take hold. They have to be part of building it,
I agree.
right? And so that's why, you know, I'm not a pundit, I'm not author, I'm a social entrepreneur, right? And so I'm looking increasingly for people who want to help us build this, want to support this. And so this is a really amazing time to be on your podcast because we're at that moment.
Perfect. Well, I'm happy that you're doing this. I've watched you for many years and I love the way you're thinking. And so you're definitely in the right direction. So I love it, definitely. So, if you were the world, according to you, Michael, and we did everything you said, what would be your wish for privacy or data protection? Anywhere in the world, whether that be regulation, human behavior, or technology.
Yeah, was it, I've heard, I think one of your other recent podcast hosts restated this, that privacy is the ability to control how your story gets told. And
Yep.
and I think that what this ultimately is about is those stories. It's, the line from Hamilton, who lives, who dies, who tells your story. And the most important stories we tell are the ones about ourselves.
I agree.
And
Hmm.
so being able to tell that on our terms in a world where there's so many other people trying to tell a different story about us for all these different reasons, right? It's taking charge of these stories. Stories are so important. I'm a storyteller. The Moth Radio Hour. I've done story slams, and
Hmm.
I think a lot about the role of stories in human history. It's how we convey wisdom.
Right. Wisdom that AI doesn't have. Okay, let's keep going. It's
Right.
true.
Yeah, it gets at what it means to be human. I also have done intensive studies in public theology, and I look at the variety of spiritual traditions across the globe throughout history, and they're all based on stories because it gets at
Mhm.
this fundamental importance of who am I and who are you and who are we together, right? It gets at wisdom,
Mhm.
and it gets at our relationship to what it means to be human and our relationship to the greater whole, however we choose to believe or think about that.
Wow. Oh my gosh. That's amazing. So excited. I'm so excited we finally got a chance to do this. And this is a great story that you're telling. And being able to share it with so many people around the world will be just tremendous. So thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And I'm sure we'll be able to talk soon and collaborate in the future.
I've been so grateful to be on your show. Thanks so much, Debbie. Take care.
Okay, take care. Thank you.